While Danny may be gone, literally, but mentally, his presence is surely not forgotten. Hey guys, came over the season premiere of Bloodline, Season 2, Episode 1, Part 14, and I was definitely looking forward to this premiere. I mean, it's been so long since the show came back. I mean, I believe the show premiered in last March, and I didn't finish it till May, but finally, the show is back. Thank God. I am very happy it's returned because I really love the cliffhanger we were left on last year. The show opened us up to a million new possibilities, and I don't think this was a perfect premiere because, if anything, I do think this premiere was way too long. Every episode this season apparently is an hour long, which I understand because there's only 10 episodes. There's so much they can do with them, but this episode, I felt like it made sense why it was long, but other episodes, I do feel like it's going to become a problem. I did not think this was a perfect premiere, like I said. I do think some scenes dragged on a bit too long, but let's just get into this episode, because most of this episode is all about how Danny's physical presence, you know, he's gone, but he's left a lot for the Rayburns to deal with, and we very slowly, I think, are starting to see this family pretty much, you know, getting destroyed, but let's just get into this episode. I love the way it starts, because we start with John driving, and you can tell he's thinking about something. Definitely. He's not just driving randomly, you know, he's definitely thinking, and he's thinking about how when he tried to pick up Danny at the bus, and everything that happened there, you know, that's how this all started, of course. We remember Danny was going to get on that bus. John told him to not get on that bus and to pick him up, and that's how this whole situation started. And I feel John really feels that it is his fault that all this happened. Now, we know that John, of course, was the one that killed Danny, but in many ways, I think John's not just thinking about that. He's also thinking that he's the whole reason why Danny had to be killed, because if he would have just let him get on that bus, he would have been out of their lives, and they wouldn't have to deal with him. Which, yeah, I mean, that's what Danny wanted. He wanted to leave, and John didn't let him, as we know. So those were really good ways to start it. We also saw this scene with Meg. She's staring at this, like, aquarium tank, and, like, Chinese food comes in, and then Kevin is, like, afraid of, you know, he's on the beach, and he's very startled. And it really does show how broken all these siblings really are. You know, while they're trying to move on with their life, they can't help but remember their brother and what they did and everything. So John comes home, and Nolan is asleep, of course. This is the kid that's basically saying that he's Danny's son. And John looks right at this kid. He's sleeping, and we see that he really does look like his dead brother. So John really does see that he looks like his dead brother, and it's also because the guy that's playing him, Owen Teague, actually played young Danny last season, which is interesting. So he picks up Nolan's phone. There's a password on it, and basically, you know, here's my thing, that's not really that big of a secret. I mean, most people's phones, they have passcodes on them. If you want your phone to not be stolen, you know, if your phone was stolen, you want to have a passcode on it, just because that's a good thing to do. So it didn't seem that weird to me to get a passcode on it, but the show tried to make it seem like a weird thing. I don't really know why, but they did. So in the morning, we see the rest of the Rayburns, you know, Ben and Janie Rayburn, and I feel like they brought up some really good points here. You know, why is this kid here? What's he doing here? Is he really their cousin? Why is he so weird? You know, they clearly don't really like him, and he's not really saying anything. And basically, we find out that this does take place directly after the first season ended. You know, when he went to the Rayburn family, that's how this all started, and he tells them not to say a word, and basically, John says that because of them not knowing who he is, they shouldn't say a word to anyone about this. And you don't know if this is really going to stick. I mean, I could definitely see one of them blabbing about it, just because how can you not? I mean, it's probably the main thing that's going on is that they have this kid living with them and they don't know who he is. So John goes out to talk to Nolan, and obviously he's very low-key about it. He doesn't really want to interrogate him. He's actually very friendly about it, and he's all concerned about how Nolan slept, and basically tells him that they need to talk. And he talks about how basically, I guess, John the other night told him pretty much everything he needs to know about Danny, and especially basically John says that, you know, he tells Nolan that he's curious as to what he wants, and Nolan says his dad is dead and he's nowhere else to go. And honestly, Nolan's points here, I think, are very valid. You can totally tell what he's going through. He says he has nowhere else to go, and he hands over his mom's phone number from this woman named Evangeline, Evangeline, but her last name is not at all, a last name that John recognizes. Her last name, I believe, I can't think of her last name right now. What is it? I wrote it down. What is her last name? Evangeline Radozovich, and it's not at all a name that John recognized, but apparently the phone number she left him does not work and everything, and basically he hands over his mom's phone number. John says he'll track her down, but Nolan doesn't really think it's going to work, as he's tried it several times. Nothing's really happened. Nolan continues to unnerve by being just slightly off, and you can really tell that he very much is like Danny, though, in the way that he talks, the way he acts. I mean, this kid is coming across as kind of shady, because you don't know if he really is Danny's son, or if he's just making up the entire thing. I mean, I don't think he'd make up the entire thing, but you're not really sure. But right now, it seems like he does resemble a lot like Danny. So then we see another scene that really does show how haunted the Rayburn family is by Danny's death. We see Kevin is on his boat, and he can't even be on a boat anymore. He looks as ice getting low into his boat, and he literally sells it to Freddy. He says, look, I'm going to make you a profit, and, if you want this boat, I'm going to make you a profit. And Freddy says he wants $3,000, and basically he says he can't get it to him by the end of the month, but Kevin says, alright, you give me the money later, but I just want this boat. I don't ever want to fucking see it again. And you can tell that he's terrified of boats. Why? If you guys remember, how did they, get Danny? They basically, they made it seem like he left town. His body is hidden somewhere, and John, of course, set that boat on fire. So Kevin, clearly, he can't even be on boats anymore. I mean, it's pretty crazy, but it's just crazy what this death has done to the family. Just this one death, how much has affected, Kevin Rayburn. Kevin, I think, out of the three, definitely, he's the one this episode that definitely seems like he's the most, John's definitely affected, but Kevin is definitely the most effective, as you see in this episode. There's a lot going on with Kevin that you think. I really love what they did with him in this episode, and like I said, he pretty much is terrified of boats right now. It's really interesting, and he doesn't even want, well, not terrified, but he just doesn't really want to be on boats right now because of what's going on. So then we see, probably my least favorite part of the episode, we see Lowry, who clearly is going to play a much bigger part in this season. He's with an even bigger drug dealer, and they're basically talking about, people that need to get murdered, and we see there's this guy, Jose, who's awaiting execution. They ask if he's connected to the Rayburns, and, Lowry says that he's just some errand boy, and he wants to clean house with everyone who ever saw Lowry or dealt with Danny, and that guy, Carlos, Danny's former partner, is on his list, as is Eric. Eric is also on the list, and Lowry says that the word is he's left town. He cautions out this will all blow over and they can pick up where they left off. And I just gotta say, I don't really care about the storyline. I didn't care last year. I don't really care about the drug storyline. It just doesn't really interest me. I felt like we were done with this when Danny was gone, but no, we're not done with this, which I understand that Danny left a lot to deal with, and Danny's death was far from the end of this, but why do we really have to continue this drug plot? It's the one thing on the show that just doesn't seem to be working for me like everything else does. Everything else I think is really good. This just isn't really working for me in the way I wanted to, and unfortunately we have another case to deal with. If you guys know, that case last year I found to be extremely boring. I mean, it was probably the one part of the show where I really was not enjoying it, but I do like what we're seeing here. We see the feds are showing pictures of Lowry's guys that have gone either missing or they're dead, one of them including Danny, to John and Marco, and you can see the feds are really annoyed at John and Marco, and the entire, all the police pretty much, because they haven't solved anything. They haven't found any of Lowry's guys. They haven't done anything to Lowry, when Lowry has literally over 2,000 guys, and they acknowledge that the drug dealers are cleaning house, and John stares in a daze at Danny's headshot, and Marco says that they should just close the case. The best thing to do is just close it, because there's so much going on, it's caused all this damage. The best thing to do is to find a way to close it, and we don't really know if that's going to work. I think Marco is hoping that they can close it, but is that really the way they can do it? We're not really sure. Very interesting. I do like the way that that's going, but you can really tell how affected John is by Danny's death, just from looking at a picture of Danny, and John is in this trance, and it's obviously because he murdered his brother. He's not going to admit that, but there are a lot of scenes here where he comes close to admitting that he killed his brother. So, in New York, we see Meg is also not handling things well. She's literally sleeping on her office floor in New York, which I do like this set of change for Meg, because things are much different for Meg in this big city. There are times where, things are too loud, or she's separated from everyone else because, she decided to choose that over Marco, and her poor assistant has to wake her up and ask her about some secret account. Now, this is very interesting. She tells her about this guy that, was at this bank, and apparently, Robert, her father, he had some secret bank account that no one knew about, and this is something that Meg says, talk to Sally about it, but Sally, we know, is very kind of unstable right now, so Sally's not the person to talk to, and we see Meg's boss is looking less than thrilled with her when she she shows up for a meeting. She asks if Meg is free to entertain some prospective clients that night because no one seems to really show up. You know, she's always late and everything, but I do like the bond that these two have. Definitely, I like the way that that's going. But you can definitely tell that Meg is, again, also having a hard time adjusting to things. You can definitely tell because, of course, she was one of the ones that helped hide Danny's body. We know that. So, basically, John then makes some calls about Evangeline because he wants to know if Evangeline actually does exist. But it's a very interesting thing because he calls her residence, and the person that's there says they know no one by the name of Evangeline and that they just moved in. So, again, you're really wondering, is Evangeline Rosdovich, is this a real person? Is she someone that's, you know, is she really connected to Nolan, or is this just some random girl that Nolan found? I mean, you don't really know. I know Evangeline is a real character because she is going to be on the show and she's billed as a main character, so eventually we're going to meet her, but right now she's a very mysterious character and I'm really looking forward to seeing what's going on there. So Marco comes in, says he's bothered by something, you know, and the question is, was Danny really going to go to the pier dedication? And John, we can tell, has become a really good liar, though. He stays very cool. Marco tells him that he's going to pursue other leads. And we see John, he's very slowly trying not to reveal that he was the one that killed Danny. And it's clear that John is trying to frame Lowry for Danny's death, which, again, John's story does make sense. There is definitely some stuff here. We know the truth, but it does kind of make sense. And Marco tells him sincerely that he wants to do something because Danny was John's brother, and John has no choice but to say thank you. And basically, apparently Eric O'Bannon, you know, Eric O'Bannon is the main suspect, and that's really what everything's connected to, that Eric really will know all the details. They need to find out stuff about him, and basically Marco says he's going to keep digging. So then we see this flashback with Eric that I thought was kind of unnecessary. I don't really know what the point of this was. He's remembering the night at the hotel where Danny brained that dude who was trying to kill him with a seashell, and we remember that John was outside and tried to stop him. You know, basically Danny, you know, literally brained that man, like took his brain and everything, and we see Danny's face settle into a somewhat indescribable part murderous, part sad expression, and it cuts him in a car with a tape recorder in the heavy Florida rain. He lights a cigarette and hits record, and what he says on that recording is very important for the end of the episode. I just don't really know why we need to see this. I mean, I understand, obviously, there's stuff that we knew here, but I just really wasn't a fan of it. So Kevin's flip-flopping around the shipyard, and we see his partner, you know, little Jake. He's all wondering if he's okay, because he's clearly not okay, but Kevin's saying he's fine, and his worker pal is not convinced. He says that ever since Danny died, Kevin has been very unfocused, his mind isn't as on the job, and Kevin says that he doesn't need to worry, that there's really nothing he needs to worry about, and everything's gonna be fine. But like I said, Jake, really, little Jake is not at all convinced. He can definitely tell that there's something else going on with Kevin that he's just not admitting, obviously. You know, he knows that Danny died, but Kevin clearly is a lot more affected than we think he is, and you know, Jake even asks if he's going forward the new marina, and Kevin doesn't seem as concerned. You know, it seems like he's not really focused on work right now. Because of Danny's death, he's just not really focused on it, and it's sad to see, but it really does show again how much Danny has affected them even when he's not there, and it's very interesting to see. So, over at the Rayburn Inn, we've got probably what's going to be one of my favorite storylines this season, and one of my favorite things that the season closed out on last year, which, of course, deals with Sally. Of course, as we know, Lenny Potts, the detective, he said straight out, you know, your children are lying to you, and Sally basically has to deal with that in this first episode, because she's sitting on the porch, and she always knows more than the kids think she does, and in this case, she knows all about Nolan. She thinks that, you know, she says they're coming for dinner, and John's supposed to get them up to speed on the investigation, but of course, Sally doesn't know anything. That's the thing that's really sad, is that Sally thinks she knows what's going on. She knows nothing. She doesn't know that John killed Danny. She doesn't know what really happened to Danny, and it's sad to see. You know, she doesn't know why John is lying to her. She has no idea, and Detective Potts offers to help her out, and you can really see how much this has affected Sally, because she really does want to trust her kids, but right now she doesn't really trust them because she knows they're hiding something from her. Now, what it is, we don't know, but I do like the way that's going. I like overall the storyline. It's sad to see, but like I said, I really do think Sally's going to end up cracking this season just because of the way things are going. So John chats with the sheriff, who says that he hears throwing his hat in the ring, you know, because as we know, John wants to be sheriff. He wants to apply for sheriff, and the sheriff is telling him that, you know, this isn't a good thing to do, and he says that the sheriff is saying, you know, he is, that's not cool. He tells him his friend if he runs that he's going to stomp his ass, and right now they're being kind of cordial about it, but you can tell that really there is going to be a big thing going on here, because John really does want the sheriff position, and that, you know, we know that his boss is going to try to take that from him, and he wants that sheriff position as well. So I do think there's going to be a bit of clashing here. I do like the way that's going, and I like this storyline overall. I think it's good that John wants to be sheriff, but because of what he's done, you can tell this has really affected John, and is it really the best thing for him to do to be sheriff? I'm not really sure. I feel like John's kind of unstable right now, and him being sheriff, I don't know if that's the best thing. We'll have to see where that goes. So John comes home, and he's not psyched because he sees Jane and Nolan are having a great time chatting. You know, they're really getting to know each other, and Jane really is actually enjoying the DNA strain in the family, which I do like that Janie and Ben are getting more to do. Not that Janie didn't. Janie definitely had more to do towards the end of the season, but here she's having a lot more to do. John sits down, and Nolan gets a wary look on his face. John tells him that he hasn't found his mom yet, and Nolan is saying, you know, he asked what he wants. He wanted him to meet him, and he wanted to meet him and see if the Rayburns were actually real, or lie that his dad told him. Because remember, Danny never told them that he had a son. You know, he never specifically said, oh, I don't have children, but he never indicated that he did either. And it's crazy that Nolan thought this was a lie. And honestly, I think this kid is completely sincere, because this is totally something that Danny would do. Danny was always very sleazy this way, and I totally think that he'd do that. And John gives him this really strange line about not expecting people to embrace you when you come out in the blue, and I feel like what John is trying to say here is, you know, people aren't going to be as nice to you when you've done something wrong. He knows he's done something wrong, and Nolan is saying, chill. Now, we know what John, of course, talking about. We know how affected he is, and he said that Danny started sending him money, and basically turns out the answer to the mystery envelope is, of mystery's envelopes of money. Danny was sending them to his own apartment there in Miami, and that's when he and Nolan would also hang out, and it's seeming hard and hard to deny who this kid belongs to. You know, it really seems like this kid is definitely Danny's. Just from what he's saying, it definitely seems like this is all connected to Danny. This is totally something that Danny would do, you know, send him all this money and everything, and Nolan never really knew if this was actually true. And Nolan also happens to know about the drugs in the apartment. You know, John says, you know, did you, by any chance, you see anything there in September? And Nolan says, no, he wasn't even in Miami in September. So this is really interesting what's going on here. We don't fully understand what's going on with this, but the remaining Rayburn siblings get a conference call because John obviously needs to talk to them about this. And I already do like how close all three of them really are, and how now they all kind of have to move on. But John tells him he totally believes Nolan's story, and Kevin is freaking out that, you know, how did Danny not tell him about this? And Meg is saying that this doesn't change anything. You know, I like the way that they're all divided here, that John is very, you know, he's very, you know, he really much believes this, and he's very, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the word I'm looking for. He's very confident about his answer that this is definitely Nolan, while Kevin's kind of freaking out, is very erratic, and Meg is saying, oh, no, this doesn't change anything, and John says he's not bringing Nolan to the inn, and not to tell Sally. The investigation is also at a standstill, and he'll fill them in at dinner, and Meg clearly saying that she lives in New York, but she hangs up, and her assistant reminds her that the bank keeps calling, and she also has dinner with her boss and clients, and I do like that Meg is separated from everyone now, because it's clear that she has to deal with all this when she's not with them, and it's really interesting to see. I do eventually think that Meg's plot is going to become a bit, it's just boring. I feel like that is going to happen, but I don't think it's going to happen yet. It's just Meg's storyline is probably the one thing I'm least into. I mean, besides the drug stuff, I'm not really into Meg either. So Kevin looks at the sonogram of the baby with Belle. He grins a little weakly, and of course we know that Belle is having a baby. I do like that Kevin and Belle are together. Belle also is a main character this season, so it's clear they're going to give her a lot more to do. And Belle points out that he doesn't seem happy. They go into this whole fight where she doesn't want to guess what he's feeling. He needs to tell her what's going on. He tries to make her feel a bit crazy. She points out that he won't even talk about Danny. Never. Anytime she brings him up, he doesn't talk about it. He blinks a bit, shuts down further, but then he breaks and says that he wants to tell her everything, and she just tells, and she says to just tell her, and she's begging, and he says that he fucked up so much, he's in so much shit, and it seems like he actually is going to tell her what happened to Danny, but he doesn't tell her that. He goes all into how he's, you know, he's broke, and what's going on there, and you can tell that Belle knows there's something more going on. I mean, as convincing as Kevin is, Belle can tell there's something more going on. He would not be that upset if he was broke. It just does not seem like something that Kevin would do, and she knows who Kevin is. You know, she knows that Kevin wouldn't lie about this kind of stuff, so she can definitely tell there's something more going on with Kevin than, you know, he's making it. So Diana's then drinking out on the porch. She runs into Potts, you know, Detective Potts, and she tells John and Sally confirms that Potts is still sniffing around, and John is a little put out by all this because he knows that Potts is investigating the case and he knows something is going on with the family. So obviously Diana's going to get involved. I feel like Diana's going to find out some stuff that she doesn't want to, and of course Diana doesn't even know that John killed Danny. The only person that knows that John killed Danny is Kevin and Meg. Those are the only people that know. Diana, I believe, does not know, and it definitely shows me that Diana's going to get a lot more to do, which I do like, because Diana was very much just John's wife last season, but it seems like this season she's going to give a lot more to do, and I really do like that. So we're giving quick cuts to Nolan, who prowls around the Rayburn house. He's opening drawers, he's looking at pictures, and he's seeing life that wasn't given to him, and I thought this was kind of sweet that we saw this. I mean, as shady as this is, I mean, it really, I think it's more of him just seeing what he couldn't be involved in. You know, he never met this family, he never even knew if they existed, and he's just as, you know, he was just as unsure if they were actually real as they were, and it's really sad to see that this had to happen to him, but that's exactly what happened. So Meg is on speaker, listening to the update about the investigation, and a really cool thing here where they actually had, you know, John be annoyed by the, you know, siren sounds of NYC, because it's completely different from what they're used to in Florida. You know, Florida is such a smaller type, you know, hotter, just you know, more like country type place, and NYC is so city filled that it's real different for John than, you know, obviously the Florida Keys, and I do like seeing that. And John reiterates this is all about Lowry, and Sally glowers at him and says not to give up on Danny, and that they should not give up on him. There's definitely more going on there. They need to look at more leads, and it's clear that Sally does want to do something here. You know, she's convinced that definitely there's more going on, but of course they have to make it seem like this is all about Lowry. And Meg and her boss then go to Daniel's West End in Midtown to charm a couple of guys, and we see this montage of Meg. She's drowning glass after glass of red wine, and she's clearly drinking excessively, probably because that's how she's dealing with death, which is a way to do it. When you're, you know, when someone dies, the way to do it is to drink your sorrows away, and we can tell by her boss's slightly horrified face, but the guys are really loving it, and she talks about the Keys, crystal meth, and cockfighting, and says unconvincingly she doesn't miss it for a second, and Suzanne tries, who of course her boss, she tries to get her to switch over to coffee, but that's not happening. She looks at the menu with the name Daniel on the front, and she starts to come apart a little bit, and she steps away from the table, goes outside where she's clearly having some sort of panic attack, and it's really sad to see that this is what's happening to her, but you can really tell they're all kind of unstable. And Kevin, then we see, pulls out a stack of cocaine from the bottom of the ocean, and obviously that's a problem, because we know that Kevin had problems with that before, and Sally then sits on the porch, waits to hear her son come lie to her some more, and he again is lying to her. First, he asks her about him running for sheriff, and she asks him about the drugs in the apartment in Miami. If it's possible someone else besides Danny could have put him there, he said it's possible. She asks when he knew that Danny was dealing drugs. She shames him about not talking to her about it, and she points out that she could have helped if she hadn't been left in the dark, and that's what she feels. She feels left in the dark because she was left in the dark. They're not telling her because they don't want her to have to deal with it and know that their own son killed her, you know, her son. And he apologizes, and she says, you know, what is he saying now? What else is he keeping from her? And she already knows about Nolan, as we know. So she's basically setting him up. You know, she kind of is starting to realize what's going on. And, you know, he didn't tell her about Nolan, but she knows about Nolan. She tells him this is his chance to tell her what's up. He sits, and for a second you think he's going to tell her, but he does not do that. And Sally's face, you can just tell, is she's devastated because she wants to hear the news from her son. She wants to know the truth. And, you know, she watches as he continues to spin around his lies and misdirections, and then she stomps off, and she's really pissed, obviously, because he's not getting anywhere. He's not telling her anything that she wants him to. You know, she knows that he knows the truth, and she knows that he knows what's going on, but he's not telling her anything, and it's very sad to see. I really did feel bad for Sally, and honestly, out of all the characters, Sally is the one I feel the worst for, because she thinks she knows what's going on, but she doesn't know the half of it. That's really what's sad, is that the stuff that she knows, yes, it's great that she knows that, but she doesn't know the half of it, and that's really what's sad here. So Kevin then drinks a beer, which is most definitely, basically he comes out to greet Marco, and Marco asks if Kevin will go with him. Kevin is all saying that he does some coke in order to calm down, and it doesn't really work, but basically it's interesting to see Kevin having a problem with drugs, and then Meg is having problems with drinking, and Meg sees her boss outside the office. He quickly tells her how uncool her behavior was the night before, and Meg is saying that people drink a lot from where she comes from, and the clients loved it, but her boss is not really impressed at all that she's drinking. And Meg is asking if she's firing her, and Suzanne is saying if she slept at the office the other night, you might not be handling the transition well. She tells Meg to take the weekend off, and it does not sound optional. So she's not fired, but she does need to take the weekend off and, you know, maybe have some time off for a little bit, which I do think is a good idea for Meg to do. Obviously, Meg is going through a lot, you can definitely tell. But out of the three, I mean, Meg probably, you know, she is the one that doesn't seem as unstable, but she definitely is just as unstable. You know, just the fact she's sleeping on the floor, she's drinking a a lot, it's obviously going to become a problem, and you definitely do see that here. So Marco takes Kevin to look at a burned out boat, and it's the one that John blew up with Danny's dead body, definitely, and Kevin is a jittery mess because he knows exactly what this boat is, and he looks closer to the boat, visibly sweating. Marco looks very suspicious because he knows something is going on, and Kevin says something about insurance scam, but then he flips out a little bit at Marco about getting dragged down and plays a victim card. You know, he says, how dare you question me at a time like this, and it's very effective because Marco can tell there's something more going on, and that's something I love, is that all the characters, they're not falling for this, really. They can tell there's something more going on. It's just they don't specifically know what's going on. It's more like they do know, but they don't really know, which is interesting. So, I really did like that scene, and again, we can tell that Kevin is deadly afraid of boats just because of this situation. He can't look at boats the same way again. We remember how much Kevin loved boats. I mean, he had a boat business, and now he can't even see them again. So, John is sitting at the old Rayburn truck, trying to put up a first sale sign. He gets a call from Kevin, and we cut to John asking, you know, why he's talking about the insurance scam, and this leads to a discussion of what is normal behavior and what isn't, and John has become pretty scared. He tells Kevin that he has to be ready for anything. Kevin says he's scared. This is a really, I love this scene, the way this was done. John says that he has to be smart. The only one they're looking for at is Lowry, and they need to keep it that way. They need to be really low-key about this, and they need to not reveal certain details. And Kevin brings up Nolan, and then brings up Marco, and John is saying that he just needs to worry about his wife and kid, and that's it. But of course, you can tell that that's not something that Kevin can really do. He's obviously worried about Nolan. He's obviously worried about the whole Marco investigation, and John's a look in his face and says he's not too jazzed to see Kevin unraveling. Kevin asks John if he feels guilty at all, and John says you can't think like that, and I'm sure John does feel guilty, but he just isn't really letting that guilt sink in yet. And Kevin tells John that she wanted to tell Belle, and John says that that will be a bad idea, and Kevin says that, you know, they had to do it right, they had to do it. John takes a call from Marco, and John says that anything with Marco he's going to handle, and it's clear that John wants to be the one to handle all this stuff, but it's clear that I don't really know if that's going to work either, because Kevin is clearly very effective at what's going on. Even though John is telling him, you know, don't get involved, Kevin is obviously, you know, going to get involved at some point. So Lowry's is chilling in his house while his kids play video games when the bell rings, and it's the sheriff's department, and Lowry walks out. He sees John out in the driveway, and you know that obviously he's going to try to confront him, and it seems like John is going to outright frame Lowry, because again, Lowry also doesn't know what happened. So Meg talks to the mysterious bank guy, and it turns out that Robert had a regular secret payment out to someone, and it's up to Meg to decide whether to keep it up or not. She says it depends on who the payment's actually going toward. Now, who's it going toward? I'm thinking Danny, because if you remember, Danny always asked for this money. Robert never gave it to him. Maybe secretly Robert was giving money to... Now, here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking Robert was giving money to Nolan. I feel like that would make sense, that Robert knew about Nolan. Danny didn't have the money. Robert gave him that money. I feel like that's really might be what's going on, that Robert could be the one giving the money to Nolan. I feel like that's what's going on there. So Lowry's house is clean. He's a smart criminal. John gets a call from the Miami shelter for runaways. Turns out that Nolan was there in September, which means that he lied to John, and it's entirely possible he saw John and Kevin playing the drugs in his father's apartment, and you can definitely tell there's more going on there. Nolan is smoking just exactly the way that Danny did, and he ends up at a little shack deep. He knocks at the door, tells Eric that John is lying. So clearly there's more going on with Nolan. I don't know if Nolan knew who Danny was, or if he's not even Danny's son, but there's definitely something going on with this kid, and we don't know what it is. So Meg is looking at the bank statements from her father, and it turns out he sent $5,000 to none other than Evangeline. So Evangeline does exist, and now Meg is involved, and I do like that Meg is involved in this, because it's not just keeping it separate. I like that everything really is, they're all involved. I like seeing that. So clearly there's something more going on with Evangeline. We haven't met her yet, but it feels like we have met her. Evangeline feels like a character we've had on for a while. We obviously haven't, but it feels like we've known her. So back at his house, John looks over some papers. He gets a call. He goes to the boatyard to meet Lowry, and Lowry tells John he didn't like Danny, but he didn't kill him, and he then tells John he needs investigation to go away, and John is asking why he'd do that, because obviously he's making it seem like he doesn't believe him, and it turns out that Lowry might just have the upper hand. He puts a tape into a player. We hear the voice of Danny, and he says, hey, and we can finally find out what that tape was. He said, hey, John, I'd like you to meet my friend Liam Lowry. I've told you some things that could make your life very difficult, and that is how the episode ends. And guys, I really like this premiere. I thought there were a lot of things I definitely really did love. I thought some conversations went on a bit too long, but overall, I really really did enjoy this premiere overall. There's a lot of great stuff going on here. First of all, what the hell is going on with Nolan? I don't trust this guy whatsoever. Something about him. This kid, I just don't trust him. The way he's acting, the way that he's seeming like he's not telling the truth to John, and it's clear that he's investigating John as well. I don't really know who he is, but I don't feel like he's Danny's son. I feel like there's definitely more with this kid that we don't know, and that's something I'm definitely interested in seeing, is who this kid really is, what his agenda is, things like that. That's something I'm not really sure about, and I'm sure we are going to find out as things go on. You know, I love the way that all the siblings are very slowly unraveling. John seems to be the one that's kind of staying kind of low-key about it, but Kevin clearly, you know, he's having a lot of drug problems, Meg's having drinking problems, things that weren't as big as a deal now, but now that Danny's died, now it's really affecting them. And I love that Danny, even though he's not alive, his presence is still there, and they definitely do feel it. And I feel like John is trying to keep that inside, but eventually he is going to unravel. You can definitely tell that's going on. Right now, things are working out well for him because he's trying to frame Lowry, but it does not seem like that's going to work, and Lowry is definitely one step ahead of him. So let's see what that's going on. Let's talk about Evangeline, because how did Robert know Evangeline? Why did Robert, you know, why did Danny keep Evangeline a secret from everyone else except Robert? Because we know that Robert, that was the one person that Danny clearly did not trust at all. So definitely there's something more going on there with Evangeline. I hope we find out more about her, because definitely she's already a very intriguing character, and I can't wait to see what's going on with that. I think that whole situation is going to be very interesting, and that whole situation is crazy as well. Why Danny lied about Evangeline, why I never told him about her, I'm not really sure. Marco, definitely, all the characters, they know what's going on. Sally knows what's going on, Marco what's going on. I'm sure that they know that something more is going on, because they're being very secretive about it, and definitely something is going to happen there. I don't know what's going to happen, but like those scenes, you know, like Belle, Sally, Marco, all of them know. They all know something is going on. They don't know specifically, but of course, Sally knows about Nolan. That's something that John isn't going to tell her, and I'm hoping that John does tell her. But also, now we have this detective, you know, Detective Potts investigating them. I don't really know what's going to come of that. We'll have to see what happens with that. But overall, guys, I already think this season's going to be better than last season. I mean, this season is already a lot more interesting. I'm really interested in seeing how everything turns out. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. There's a lot of moving pieces, and definitely the episodes are a lot longer, but they are only 10 episodes, so I do feel like we're really going to stretch this out. I understand the show needs to be slow-paced. I just felt this episode was a bit slow. Like, some of Meg's scenes, I'm like, just a bit slow. But overall, guys, let me know if you guys saw this episode. What do you think of the season overall? I cannot wait for the rest of the season, and I will see you guys next week, which will be for a movie review, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.